Hello, it's me again. It's good to see you all, even though I'm not seeing you, but I'm imagining that I'm seeing you. And if you're watching this, you're at least seeing me on your screen in any case. But I wanted to get together, so to speak, to go over preparing for your first midterm. I don't remember if I had mentioned that I would be doing this, but I wanted to give a talk, kind of a review session, so to speak, for the first midterm, and I'll do the same for the second midterm and then again for the final. As I said, I don't remember if I had mentioned this either in the introduction to the course or in the introductory lecture or talk, but that's the purpose of this. In an in-person class, when I teach this course in person, I usually have the period before the midterm is due dedicated to a review session where I go over the exam, review with students the material, give indications of what might be there, and try to prepare students to do as well as they possibly can on the actual exam. Obviously, this is a different situation. You're not going to be coming into class and taking a blue book exam. This is a take home exam. You've already seen the question, you've had the question from the very beginning. So, in that sense, there should be absolutely no surprises. But still, I think it can help you, that is, to go over some of the expectations, assumptions that I have in terms of what I want to see from the exam. What do I want to see from you? Now, that is not necessarily the only consideration for your exam, but it is a major one because, as you know, I will be grading your exam. And so I think it would be in your best interest to know what is kind of in my head, so to speak, what I look for when I go to grade an exam. Given that, now you have four documents that are all posted in course documents that will help you prepare for the exam. Uh, the first is the exam itself. Uh, as I just said, that has been posted since the first day, so you know precisely what the exam consists of. There are two parts: short ID or short essay, actually, short essay identification of terms, and then a longer essay question. And I'll address both parts. Then there is, in addition to the exam itself, there is the guide to writing the exams, which is the same for both of the midterm exams. There is a separate guide to writing the final exam, because the final exam is a little bit different. So that should help you. And in the guide to writing the exams is also information in terms of the form to submit it in and those types of things. Then the third document that is designed to help is terms to know for the first midterm. Um, you may be saying, why did I give you a list of terms to know when you already have the exam? You don't need to look at anything else. Well, the terms to know is an indication of what I think are the basic, let's say, vocabulary words, so to speak, and I'll be saying more about this shortly, that I would want you to know, expect you to know, hope that you know for the exam, and therefore should incorporate them as much as possible into your exam. And I'll be addressing that shortly too, because that really applies to section 2 of the exam, part 2 of the exam. So again, just there's the exam, the guide to writing the exam, the list of terms, and then the fourth document that is posted in course documents designed to help is the document historical argument. Now, especially for part 2, the essay question, you are expected to present an argument. And I'll be talking more about that in a moment. That document, historical argument, is intended in any case to help you formulate an argument, construct an argument, because an argument, there's a logical structure to it, and then there's a rhetorical structure, meaning how do you present your case? And again, I'll address that in terms of the essay of part 2 of the exam shortly. Those are kind of the overview, and essentially those documents are part of the course material. So I would expect you to know those documents and to use them to help prepare yourself for the exam. Now, given that, let's look at the exam because that's the core of it. The exam consists of two parts, as I hope you know. the short essays and then the longer essay. And I'll deal with those two parts separately here. Now, I'm not going to be giving you indications of what might be on the exam because, again, in an in-person course, I give a list of terms to know. I give a study guide, sample examples of essay questions that might be there is on the study guide. And then in the review for the exam session, when I'm talking to everyone in class, I give, in my view, what is some pretty strong indications of the terms that will actually appear on the exam. Well, that's not needed here, obviously, because you have those actual terms, because you have the exam. So, but I want to go over then the function of that first part, the identification of terms, so to speak, in short essays. And I do address this a bit in the guide to writing the exams. You have 5 terms to answer. And I've selected those terms from the list of terms. And so in terms of that, that's what you are going to have to do. Now, what is an identification of a term in a short essay like this? It is to identify this term so that it cannot be anything else, discuss its context historically, and its significance or importance. Now, my experience has been that usually students sometimes have a problem discussing what the significance or importance of these terms are. And I'm not saying that they don't know what the significance or importance is. I'm saying that what they write on their exam, it's not clear what the significance and importance is. I often say it can help you if you, after you kind of answer and write your short essay, I believe it should be at least a minimum of half a page per term. Um, that you say, and this is important because, or this was of significance because. That may not be all that elegant, but at least it clearly shows that you are, number one, following the directions, and number two, are distinguishing the significance of the term from the description of the term. Like I say, but isn't that kind of playing with semantics? I think no, it's not. Often the significance is very similar to the description and the context. If we were to say, the Code of Hammurabi, ancient legal code, first extant legal code that we have, it reveals structures of society or whatever. I mean, that is one of the terms, so I'm not going to give you a model answer for it. But describe it fairly well. But then don't address its significance. Why is this important? Why is it important that it's the first fully extant legal code? Why is it important or significant that it reveals social structures? That's where we get really into the interpretive aspect of history, that insight. What insight do you bring to these terms, to the concepts and what they signify? Terms signify things. And there's an entire world behind the term, Hammurabi and his code, an entire world and actually worlds behind Mesopotamia. And so what this is actually trying to get at in this part one is, number one, what are the worlds behind these terms? What are the worlds that these terms signify? And why is that important for our understanding of Western civilization? I mean, the important significance, you can say, well, it's not very important or significant to me. Does it make my life any different? And I'd say, yeah, okay, fine. We could talk about that on the more broad level, whether knowing about Mesopotamia enriches your life. But on the very practical level, in terms of this course, why is that term there? Why did I select that term? To think about it in those terms, and then address that issue in terms of the significance or importance of it. There's an art to this, and I think I mentioned in the guide to writing the exams, talking about the terms, you can think of yourself as writing kind of a short or relatively short encyclopedia entry on these terms for high school students. Okay, let's say that was your task, that we're going to comprise an encyclopedia of Western civilization for high school students, and they will then be given the assignment that they have to write a report. And they will have to write a report on one of these terms. What do they need to know? They need to know what it is, when it was, what was going on at the time in the context, so a little bit about the term, and then why it's important. Those are the four components. The what, the context, or the description, the what, description, the context, and importance. All those elements need to be there in your answer. And so when I say a minimum of a half a page, that is simply probably the bare minimum if it was very concisely constructed and put forward. Maybe I think you could probably do it in a half a page. If you take more, that's not a problem. If you want to write a page and a half or 2 pages or 3 pages on each term, that is absolutely fine. And I would encourage you to do so because the point of this exam is to show what you know. What do you know and what can you do? Now, that does not mean simply copying from the textbooks or the textbook or copying from the lectures. That's not showing what you know. That is showing what you can copy and cut and paste. That's not the idea for the terms, okay? The terms is really from all this information, what do you see as its significance and importance? Where do you find that it has connections to other aspects of the course? So, for example, Mesopotamia is one of the terms on the exam, and Egypt was not in ancient Mesopotamia. So, you could, for example, compare Mesopotamia with Egypt in that first part of the exam talking about the terms, if that would help. I mean, again, the comparison between Mesopotamia and Egypt is not what the ID essay, the short essay on Mesopotamia is intended to be as such. But if that will help reveal why Mesopotamia is so important, then please do so, if that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. Now, I hope what I've said about the terms gives you an indication of what I'm looking for or expecting. I want to see those four parts: an identification, so it could be nothing else, a description, context, and why is it important, its significance. So if those all elements are there, and you've shown that you have taken into account the course material, which is the text, the lectures, the lectures and the textbook, combining the two, the textures, the lectures and the textbook. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Absolutely fine. But that is what is kind of hoped for, designed, expected as I'm looking at and grading your exam for each of the essay or each of the terms. Now, as I'll say again at the end of all of this, if you have any questions about answering the terms, please just send me an email and we can set up a Zoom session if we need to, or I can just try to answer over email. Because the whole point of this is I want you to do well. I do. And so I want to help you the best that I can do well. But more importantly, I want you to think. I want you to analyze. That's what really the exams are getting at. What do you do with this material that's been presented to you, that you've been assigned, and whether or not you like it or not. I hope you're liking it, certainly, because I think it's so exciting. But whether you like it or not, that's not the point. Whether it's important to you is not the point, really, because it is important to you in terms of your grade. So, that being said, I want to see how you put it together. And then that is really the case for part 2, the essay. Now, the essay question is a little bit different. It should be probably a minimum of 3 to 5 pages. Again, as a bare minimum with no maximum. So you can submit as long of an essay as you feel is warranted based on what you know and how you see things, and to present your case and your argument. There's no cutoff as long as it's pertinent. Again, I don't want 5 pages of cutting and pasting from the textbook and lectures. But the textbooks and lectures are your evidence, or at least they present your evidence for making your case. Now, that is where then the historical argument document comes in. Because in the part 2, the essay, you're given a problem, you're given a question. You have to take a stance and defend it with the evidence. This is not asking what do you think. This is not asking about your opinion. I'm not going to grade your opinion. I mean, everybody's entitled to their own opinions. I might disagree. I might agree. But if I made that the basis for how I grade your essay, in my view, that would be absolutely wrong. That'd be unethical and absolutely wrong. So I'm not grading opinions, beliefs. I can grade how well you argue, how well you have analyzed the material that you've been assigned in the course material, and then apply that to the question. This too is then where the list of terms really comes in, because the more of those list of terms that you can use in answering the essay question, the better it is. Now, I absolutely do not grade on some quantifiable basis. There are, I think, 48 terms on the list of the terms to know. And I don't say, okay, if you hit 90% or more of those terms, you get an A. If you only do 80% or more, you get a B. So on. That's not how I grade. This is not a checklist. And some of the terms may not apply at all to the essay question. Others might be able to if you could fit them in, but might not. The thing here is to use the terms, those 48 terms, as the content which you use to answer the essay question. Because I said, okay, look, it's the course material, the textbook and the lectures, where there are a lot more than 48 terms presented in the textbook and lectures covering the same material. Does that mean you should not use or can't use terms that are found in the lectures or textbook that are not on the list of terms to know? Absolutely not. You certainly can use whatever is in the course material to apply to it. But that list of terms to know, I've constructed to help you say, okay, out of all this information, here is a distillation of what I want you to know as a central part. And then on that basis, use this for your essay. Now, here's something else that probably I shouldn't be saying, but I'm going to because I think it will help. And that is, how do I go about grading? I've already said I don't have a checklist. I don't go through and read and go, oh, there, you hit that point. Yep, you hit that point. I don't do that whatsoever. And I think that how I go about grading in some ways is how basically everyone in the history department that I know of probably goes about grading if they're actually honest about it. Because grading is tricky. It really is. I don't believe in such a thing as quote unquote, objective grading or blind grading. I think it is subjective, but that gets into the distinction of what is objective and what is subjective. But it is, unless you are making it objective, like in a multiple choice exam, then that could be pretty objective. But with an essay, how do you grade an essay? How do you evaluate? There's not a right answer. I do not have a right answer in my head in terms of what the answer to the essay question that I've asked you is, and then grade to the extent that you approximate or approach that model answer. That is not the way I go about it either. What I do is is say, what are they going to do with this? How are they going to handle this? How are they going to answer this? Do they follow the stipulations? Some of the stipulations are for this. I'm just going to call up or bring up now the exam itself. And I'll read it to you. If I can go here, I'm getting it out. I'm looking and looking and looking. Here we go. The question, as you should know by now, is what was the role of law, religion, and politics in the emergence and development of civilization from ancient Mesopotamia to approximately the quote-unquote fall of Rome? How were law, religion, and politics related? For understanding the development from the origins of civilization to the fall of Rome, can a distinction be made between law, religion, and politics? If so, how so? If not, why not? Now, there you see, in terms of the components of the question or the stipulations of the question, you need to address law, religion, and politics. You need to address how those three are related. How did they work together? Are they kind of different viewpoints of the same thing, whatever that thing is, the way society was governed? Or can we say, no, they're different? And obviously, A religious text such as the Enuma Elish, the ancient Babylonian creation myth, is very different from the Code of Hammurabi, which is a law code. And politics is then what did Hammurabi actually do in terms of conquering and ruling Babylon? Those are three separate developments, and yet they're all together. And so that question is, can we distinguish between them, or do we have to treat them all as one and the same? And if so, how so? If we do distinguish them, how do we go about distinguishing what is law as opposed to religion, and what is politics as opposed to law and religion? And on what basis do we make those determinations? Or do we say that basically law, religion, and politics are simply just three different ways of looking at the same development in terms of ancient civilizations? And of course, this will be continued on throughout the course of Western civilization in so many ways. And it's only much later that we start to distinguish and separate. And that is, in some ways, one of my arguments about religion and politics is they're the same thing. And we have this idea of the separation of church and state. Okay, those are distinct, and we do, quote unquote, in the United States have a separation between church and state. In that, what does the non-establishment clause say of the Constitution, which is what the separation of church and state is based on? It doesn't say in the Constitution church and state are to be separate, but it says that the government will establish no given church. It's the non-establishment clause. But certainly, I would argue, especially recently, the last 10 years or so, if church and state are separate, are religion and politics separate? Are religion, politics, and law separate in our society today? Now, that's not what I want you to base your answer on, but to help you conceive of what this question is getting at. You can, if you think about it today, how would we distinguish that? Are there laws? Of course, there are laws. In terms of regulation of one of the hot topics, abortion. Yeah, there certainly are. Is that also a religious issue? Oh, yes. For many people, anyway, it is a religious issue. Is it a political issue? Absolutely. So you see the interaction of these three. Can we distinguish them in our society today? I say yes, we can. Can't, even though they're all together still. But in ancient societies that we've looked at, how do we go about doing that? How do we go about talking about religion? How do we go about talking about law and politics? Can we talk about the one without talking about the other two? And then where do we see that development in the period we've been talking about, which is essentially the origins of civilization and the emergence of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia and the ancient world. So you can include Egypt in there as well. And then, if you look chronologically at the question, it's saying, okay, from the origins of civilization to the so-called fall of Rome. Well, when was the so-called fall of Rome? Well, as I argue in the lecture, that's a term that we can't really identify, but let's say by the end of the 5th century, or we can say even by the end of the 4th century, or the early 5th century, the mid 5th century. It doesn't really matter. That's not the point. This is not a hidden way of trying to say, do you know when the fall of Rome was? Because, as I argue, it depends on how you define the term and what we mean by fall. And so we can go from there. But if you don't address, let's say, ancient Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome, there's going to be an issue. And how do you go about doing that? List of terms. So that's one thing in terms of grading your exam. Do you follow the directions, the stipulations? Then I go about reading it. And this is how I do it. The more there are, the better your grade is. And the more the worse your grade is. Now, you can say that's not a fair way of grading. I think it is. It's about my reaction based on my you know, understanding of the course material and whether you get something right or wrong. I said there's no right or wrong answer, but you can get things right or wrong. Now, on a blue book exam, there's a little bit more leeway because that's based on your memory. But here, if you completely mess up a date or an order or a sequence, that's more problematic because you have the information right before you. So that also means, basically make sure you proofread your exam before submitting it. Don't just, type it all out and then submit without looking at it. That can be deadly. Now, that is, how to go about it. And then I'm open about it. If I have assigned your essay a grade that you think is not accurate, okay, let's talk about it, please. Let's say, can we, set up a meeting? I want to talk about my grade because I don't think you give me a fair grade. I think my essay is worth more than what you gave it. So, okay, great. And if you can convince me, I will always raise your grade if you can convince me that I made a mistake in grading it. Usually the case is, I don't think I've ever had that happen, actually. I've had the case of, I've miscalculated the grade. I mean, with just doing the math and thought, okay, yeah, I'll increase it. No, and I have. I think I have increased scores a bit. But I will never lower it because often when students will come in and ask about their grade, and I go through it again, it's like, actually, I was pretty generous. Reading it again, this should actually be lower. I will never lower your grade. So there's no punishment, so to speak. There's no risk for you to say, Professor Sack, can we talk about my grade because I think I deserve better? That I encourage you to do. And in that dialogue, then, that is when we kind of deal with that coming to an agreement and understanding, we hope, of the evaluation of your essay and how it can be better and improved for the next time. Now, if there is real conflict and we can't agree, if you can't convince me and I can't convince you, then there are procedures that you can follow thereafter. And I'm happy to explain those to you when the need arises. But first, I want you to know that if you contact me to discuss your grade, I'm very open to that. Okay. That is much better than sitting and fuming and stewing and feeling that you don't really understand why you got what you got. Now, also, kind of, if you just want to say, can you explain to me why I got the grade I did? I'm really happy with it. I was surprised I got such a good grade, but I want to do even better. How can I do even better? That too, please contact me and we can talk about it because that is the whole goal. Now, that being said, you should also keep in mind that there are 2 midterms in the final. And as I explained, I think, at least in the introduction of the course, and I think in the lecture, the opening welcome lecture as well, the way the course is designed and set up is all geared toward the lecture or towards the final. Your midterms you should view as practice towards the final, because your final is worth on the syllabus 40% of your grade. Each midterm is worth 25% of your grade. So 50% of your final grade is assigned to the midterms, and 40% of your final grade is determined by the final, and the other 10% is by participation discussion. But, as I had stated, I think in the introduction to the course, if you do better on the final exam than you do on one or both of the midterms, your final exam score will replace your midterm scores. What that means is your final exam score could be worth 90% of your grade. For me, that's what it's all about. It's what you leave the course with. It's not, what have you done after the first month, the second month, the third month. And sometimes it takes a while to kind of quote unquote get it. There's that, light bulb experience, which I hope all of you have, in terms of, I'm struggling. What is this all about? How does it fit together? And all of a sudden, boing, I get it. There's that light bulb experience in terms of how do I construct an historical argument. And all of a sudden, oh, I get it. Those are the things I hope that you will have by the time we complete the course. That's why that final is so important. Now, again, just like I will never lower a grade, if you receive a lower grade on the final than you do on the midterms, your midterm grades will stand in that each midterm is worth at least 25% of your grade. It will never be worth less than, but it certainly could be worth significantly more than once you do the final, if that makes sense. If you have any questions about that, just let me know as well. So in this part 2 essay, to ensure as many as possible, really try to have fun with it. Present your case. Be creative. Think about what can I bring in that. Well, you can even think what am I going to surprise him with? What can I come up with a surprise that he'll say, "Huh." That's a very good strategy to have. And there would be this. I would say, for example, if you started talking about something that I wouldn't expect you to talk about, something some of the other terms on the list of terms to know that I might not expect would be part of the essay question or answer to the essay question, or something that or terms or information that have been presented that are not part of the list of terms. For example, what is it in the lectures that maybe intrigued you that are not really represented by the list of terms to know? Say, oh, great, because you do need to show too that you've taken into account the lectures and the textbook. And so unless there is something that is clearly from the lectures and something clearly from the textbook, that's not going to help. Because that is the basis for your grade. You could probably write a brilliant essay on the essay question given and receive basically a 0 for it. Why? Because it's not based on the course material. That's one of the things I say, don't go and use, don't search, do Google searches for the terms and the answers. Don't, do outside research. That's not going to help you. It could maybe, bolster some of your grades, but it's not going to help your grade. For example, with Greece and Rome and religion and politics, I talked about Cicero, I talked about Virgil, the myth of Rome, and how that was so important for the Augustan Revolution, which that's really kind of what that question is somehow getting at. So if you're not going to talk about the Augustan Revolution and Virgil and then, the Greek identity and the origins of civilization, there's a problem there. But I don't talk about in the lectures, and I don't remember off the top of my head if he's mentioned in the textbook. He may be, but may not be. The Roman author Juvenal. Juvenal was a huge critic of Augustus and the empire, satirist. He wrote biting and sometimes rather filthy satire. It's great reading. So if you brought in and wrote this great essay on Juvenal's view of the Roman Empire, it can be brilliant. It's not going to help. It could supplement, because if you do deal with the course material and then use a Juvenal reference or discussion as kind of, and here we see this too, that is like, whoa, good job. That would help. But if you just focus on something that's not part of the course material, that detracts from your grade, because the basis of my grading your exam is the course material and how well you've applied it. Again, I make that analogy to legal argument in the historical document, or in the document historical argument. And it's like, the legal process, which I don't know all that well, but I'm just making assumptions here maybe. You have to argue based on the evidence. And the evidence, both for the prosecutor and the defense attorney, is known. It's shared. You have to discovery. You have to share each other's evidence. You can't just go outside and bring up something new that is not part of the evidence. That's what I'm saying kind of here. The evidence presented to you for making your case is the textbook and the lectures. So if you go out and find something else, that's really not allowed. Even though I just said it's fine, it will be allowed, and it could supplement in this case. I as judge, would be able to say, yes, I will, find that to be admissible. But it's not the basis for the case. It's not the basis for your grade or rendering the judgment. I hope that kind of helps to get at what I'm talking about. And again, if it doesn't, please just send me an email and we can talk about it, because this is all about trying to maximize your performance. And whatever else you want to think about it, on a very practical level, this is performance, is how well do you perform. And I know you may be feeling, and sometimes I even feel like, I'm sitting here giving you a task, and I'm like, pulling the strings to see, can I get, the students to do what I want them to do? And that's not really what I'm getting at. I wanted to see what you come up with, what you discover. That's the exciting part of it. How do you put it all together? Yes, historical argument is important, but how do you go about doing it? There's almost an infinite number of ways you can argue the same point. How do you go about doing it? That's the creativity. That's the rhetorical structure of how can you be persuasive. If you get things wrong, mix things up or whatever, that detracts from it. But there's no right outcome. There's no right answer that you're trying to guess at or shoot for. What you're trying to do is to show me, to demonstrate to me your own learning of the course material and what you can do with it. That's what it's about. That's like the vocabulary words in that list of terms to know. Those are vocabulary words. So you have 48 vocabulary words to learn. It's not just the definition. It's also how do you use them that's important. If you've taken a world language, or with English, it works with English too, if English is your native tongue. When you're studying vocabulary, it's not just I can memorize that this definition goes with this word. It's how do you use it? And that is what this is getting at, both in terms of part one and part two. Part one, here we go, terms. Think of it as a vocabulary word with examples of use and why it's important. And then in part two, putting it in context, how do you then apply that to answering a question about it all? That's what this exam is all about. That's what this course is all about. And so that's what I'm looking for. And I think it'd be really fun and exciting. I do. And if you do too, great. If you don't, then simply say, okay, well, darn it, it's at least practical because I want to get a decent grade. Because I'm here anyway. I may not care anything about any of this, but I don't want to have to take this course again. I don't want this all to be a waste of time. I want to get through with it, and I want to do well. And so that's why I'm talking here, to try to help you do well if you're not really sure what is needed for that. And as I said before, you can always shoot me an email. We can talk about it. I'm also happy to read drafts of your exam. Now, about that, I always offer to read drafts of exams, of midterms and of finals, essays. Students rarely take me up on it. And I understand, I do understand that you're busy, you have lives. Many of you maybe are working a good deal, and this is not the only course you're taking. I get that too. And so there's an issue simply of time and what is possible. If everybody, submitted a draft to me on September 28th, the night of, and the first midterm is due September 29th, I would not be able to read them and get you comments. So the earlier you can send me a draft, the better. Can you send me an incomplete draft? Yes. Can you send me an outline? Yes. I'm happy to give general feedback. Again, I'm not going to write it for you. I'm not going to, tell you what to write because the whole point is to see what you write. But I can give you indications of, well, maybe you need to include more about this. Maybe you could strengthen this argument here. Well, what about this? Those are the kinds of comments I'm happy to give on drafts. Um, and if you are, I'm not expecting this from anybody, but it does happen from time to time. If there's an issue of you using material that's not in the textbook or the lectures, and if you're maybe afraid that you might be plagiarizing, send it to me first. Because if you send me a draft, let's say you send me a draft that's plagiarized, um, there's no penalty in that. If you submit something that's plagiarized, consciously, by intent or no, okay, because that's also a problem with, the punishments can be very different based on the intent and whatever. But um, there's a level of unintended plagiarism that you don't realize that you're plagiarizing. Um, Once you submit, that's too late because then you are subject to the punishments, whatever they might be. So, you can, if there's any question in your mind, basically, if you're using material outside the course material, you might want to say, hey, can you look at this to make sure that I'm not unintentionally plagiarizing? I'll say absolutely. Now, again, it's first come, first serve. So as a draft might come in, I will comment on it as soon as I can, give you feedback, and then the next one, and the next one. My experience has been that very, very few students ever take me up on the offer and submit a draft. And that's fine. That's why I freely keep saying no. Yeah, of course. As long as I can get to it, I'll comment. But just as a little warning, if everybody does so all at once, there's going to be a problem in terms of just my being able to get to it. So the earlier you can submit it, the better. And then it's first come, first serve. And, it could be that, sorry, I just can't get to yours, or you're going to have to wait until I can get to yours. Now, there is some leeway here, certainly, because even though the first midterm is due on September 29th, the way the course is set up, you can turn it in whenever you're done, whenever you feel good about it. The only problem is the pace of the course. You don't want to spend so much time on midterm 1 that you then short shrift yourself for midterm 2 and the final, because the final is the all important one. I would say in some ways take less time on this first exam, see how it goes, then take more time if your outcome isn't really what you are hoping for. Take a little bit more time on the second midterm, and then put a lot of time in the final, because that's the kind of the whole point of the course is building up for the final. You can almost think of the midterms as practices for the final. So work accordingly. But that offer of drafts is there and will remain until it becomes impractical or impossible to do so, because everybody is always sending me a draft and wanting immediate feedback on them. I can get, comment pretty quickly if you send me a draft, but if everybody does at the same time, that's a problem. Anyway, point taken, I hope. So I think that is about what I wanted to tell you, to share with you. And again, if you have any questions or concerns or worries, please just let me know. Email me. We can talk about it, and hopefully get you going. If you just want to talk about the material, please, email me. We can set up a Zoom session. You say, I really like Virgil. Can we talk more about Virgil? I would love to doing that. So please doing that too, in terms of interactions, because I think the one of the negatives about a 100% asynchronous online course is that there's not that direct interaction. So please feel free to use me, because that's what I think I'm here for. And we can go from there. Okay. Well, good luck on your first midterm. I'm looking forward to reading them all, and hope the semester is going well for everyone. And I'll be back for midterm 2 preparatory talk. Take care. Bye bye.